All right, so we will continue with the history of the the environment in the United States. This is the current era A, and so we will share the screen with this, and we will then go through it very quickly. All right, so whoops. So again, we're past the frontier era and the conservationists. I mean, these obviously some of these are conservationists also. It's just been kind of separated out this way in Miller's book. And so what we're going to do here is we are going to look at Benjamin Harrison. Now, he's the first president we talk about. And what I do want you to know is that he is, kind of on record. If you go back, he's not one of the best presidents. He's definitely in the bottom half. And so all presidents are judged on a variety of things. He was president on the Battle of Wounded Knee. He was trying to assimilate Native Americans and he thought he did a pretty good job, although that was one of the big massacres and last Native American major battles. So I want you to kind of get that idea about presidents and where they stand. So again, this is an environment class, so we want to look at them environmentally, although you can't just look at a person for one characteristic. But anyway, what he is known for environmentally is the Forest Reserve Act of 1891. So that 1891, that would be a good date to know. And this allowed for him to set aside land for the federal government for the people. And his first area that he set aside was actually not in Yellowstone, but right outside Yellowstone before it was actually a national park. So that is what he's known most for. So he saw the exploitation and he wanted to stop it. All right, and very famous man, this is John Muir. John Muir established the Sierra Club, another club that's out there, and these are preservationists, I guess, and the preservation movement is one of keeping things pristine for just beauty's sake. Not everybody agreed. But John Muir is definitely famous for Yosemite. He spent most of his life in the Sierras. He was Scottish at birth, immigrated to the United States, made his way to California, San Francisco, and then moved around. Was very smart, loved to be up in Yosemite, and then found ways of kind of getting people to pay him to be up there. So he was a geologist, a botanist, but he is probably the one person most responsible for getting Yosemite set up as a national park. I don't know if you've seen, one of the things we want you to do in this class is start paying attention. And so, COVID-19, so in the year 2020, articles have been starting to come out about him in the Times, especially with Black Lives Matter. He, in his writings, was considered to be racist. And he had a poor opinion of Native Americans and African Americans. And so that is starting to come out, and we're talking about taking down statues and tributes. And I think today, Black Lives Matter, that obviously is extremely important, but he will always be known for what he did for the environment. And so again, like with the presidents, everybody has their good and bad points. So his writings tended to ease off of that as he got slightly older. But unfortunately, that was definitely a flaw in John Muir. So I just want to make sure you understand everybody has their issues. And but he is people who love Yosemite, he is definitely revered for that. We'll talk about him again a little bit later. Teddy Roosevelt, President, Golden Age of Conservation. He was actually a hunter. and he was campaigning and came across the United States in trains and on stagecoaches. And what he realized is the bison were disappearing. And he started asking about it, where we used to see millions of them dot the grasslands across our country. He was noticing that they were disappearing. They were fairly easy to hunt. People were just decimating the population. And it sat terribly on him, not necessarily because he was a great preservationist, but as a hunter, he was thinking, well, there's not going to be anything else to hunt. The picture on the bottom is, I don't know if you recognize that, but that is actually the last passenger pigeon. It was actually in captivity in a zoo, and I think the zoo was in Ohio, and it died, and then it was taxidermied, and it is now in a museum, but that is the last surviving passenger pigeon. All right, Teddy Roosevelt in office actually established the first federal refuge, not a national park, not a national monument, but a refuge called Pelican Island off in Florida. And this is the first land set aside, and this is the brown pelican, the one that's most common here in California, although we do have white pelicans also. But these guys were being devastated. The island was being overrun. This was a breeding ground for them, so he set this aside. He also, another one that's important is Gifford Pinchot. Gifford Pinchot worked for the U.S. Forest Service. He was a forester. He was a lumber guy. And so he was put in charge of managing the federal lands that was set aside by Harrison. And he, at one point, worked with John Muir and tried to establish national parks, and actually trying to establish Yosemite as a national park. But he had a different view, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And they actually parted ways. The Antiquities Act is extremely important. I want you to know this. It establishes national monuments. And there is a difference between national monuments and national parks. So Antiquities Act, 1906, another date I want you to know. And this was allowed the president to set aside something for either nature or historical significance, to set it aside as federal land. And so here are the national monuments today across the United States, and you can go to this and take a look at where they are. And what I need you to know for a national monument is that it is the president that sets it aside. And so we have, national parks, and national parks are a bit different. National parks are set aside by Congress. And so which one has more protection would be the question, and I will tell you it would be national parks. It takes an act of Congress to remove a national park from the registry. National monuments, it only takes the president. So a president can come in and establish a bunch of monuments, and the next president could come in and on his or her authority could remove it. So the difference between the two, I want you to know that. All right, so the two factors, the preservationists and the wide use, or these would be the conservationists. So the preservationist would be somebody like John Muir, who's in this picture. The picture is up on the right. That is John Muir. And the picture on the left, that is Teddy Roosevelt. Where they're standing, this famous picture was taken at Glacier Point, if you're familiar with Yosemite. And they camped up there, the two by themselves. And it actually slightly snowed that night. And it was supposedly a magical evening. I don't know what that means, but this is probably where he convinced Teddy Roosevelt that it should be a national park. The wise use movement, it sounds great. That's the conservationists, and that was maybe led by Pinchot and some others. But the idea was, we don't set things aside for beauty or historical value. It is really for management. And so we are managing oil, coal, lumber. And so this is where those two departed. And it really was over a fight over a valley called Hetch Hetchy. And I want you to remember that name. Hetch Hetchy still, I guess, exists, but it is slightly above Yosemite, north in the state, and it was dammed. And that dam actually, they flooded a valley very similar to Yosemite, and led by a bunch of people, but that group, the Wise Use movement or the conservationists. And so that kind of broke it. So when we talk about water, we're going to talk about Hetch Hetchy a little bit more. All right, and then we get to the national parks, and we have Stephen T. Mathers. His name will show up in plaques and things. He's actually on a plaque at Yosemite. I was just up there a couple of weeks ago. And also, I'm showing you pictures of the first national park, and hopefully you recognize it. These pictures are actually of Yellowstone. And so he was the one that was put there to protect Yellowstone. And unfortunately, Yellowstone at that time, there wasn't a lot of money to protect it. And so it was protected actually by the armed forces. And very hard, they didn't have a lot of power. And so, but Mathers was the one responsible for trying to control and regulate all that. There is a very good series. I was hoping to show some video, but it's all, can't get to it unless you buy it. But it's PBS specials. And it's probably 11 years ago, I guess it was recorded, but very, very cool. Ken Burns, National, I forget what it's called National Parks, America's Very Good Idea, something like that. But the first few episodes talk about several of these guys we're talking about here, showing some historic footage and things. So, and here we go. So we see the national forests, national parks, wildlife refuges, all having different protections. And again, I want you to know the difference between a park and a monument. But if you stare at this map and look, what I'm hoping you notice is where are all the parks? They're all on the left. They're all in the West. You know, we live out here, we think, hey, the West is more important. But if you think about it, why would it be in the West? And it really, I've got two words, and that is manifest destiny. We hit the East Coast, the European settlers, and then they started going across the country, depleting and destroying environment. And then Teddy Roosevelt took that train ride across and finally realized, what the heck are we doing? And so what ended up happening is we started making parks and monuments and reserves. And then over here on the left, you can see we've got a lot more protected area than up on the right. All right, and our last person in this group would be Alice Hamilton. And she is a toxicologist, and she actually was the first female professor at Yale Medical School, and first female to teach at Yale as a professor. And she lived near people that worked in jobs that were dangerous. And so she was a toxicologist. And she started looking at people that worked in factories, carbon monoxide, which kills people. And now today, you're required, although not everybody has them, carbon monoxide detectors in your house, along with smoke detectors. She looked at things like arsenic and methyl bromide and all these chemicals that people were being exposed to. And so she wrote the first two books, Industrial Poisons in the United States and then Industrial Toxicology. I don't care about the dates on those. I do care about, you know, that she wrote those books. And then Exploring the Dangerous Trades, 1943, that is actually an autobiography about Alice Hamilton. So if you ever get a chance to read it, you know, it's a little dry. Yeah, I have to say it's a little dry. But she had an interesting life, and you have to realize as a woman during that time, she made some major strides in changing the laws on working conditions. And so we will stop of the video. There.